Okay, we're finishing up almost. Now we're getting into postmodernism, and I think it's chapter 13. I think many of you will really like this class, or this theory. It's more recent. It's based on social constructionism, and it's a different version. It's a more advanced version of modernism, and we'll talk about that in a second. It's based on the social constructionism, which is basically that our world is constructed through a series of social processes. Our narratives and our stories that we tell ourselves in our brain are socially constructed through what we go through in our lives. And the goal of a postmodernist is to deconstruct that story and analyze it and give yourself basically a new truth. It definitely looks at the worldview in a postmodern way, and definitely looks at the way that culture and our society affect us. It encompasses 4 different types of therapies, all of which we will learn more about next semester, and I think you will find interesting. And it is a deviation from the modernist view, which is more of the scientific method, more of the observation of the behavior, which is the behaviorism that we just came out of. We're going from modernism to postmodernism. So make sure you understand that and understand social constructionism, modernism versus postmodernists, because that's a question that I've seen before and one that I want to make sure you know. I always get ahead of myself, don't I? So modernism is behaviorism. It's basically observable behavior, and looking at objectives, helping people to return to the norm. The process of knowing includes a distrust of the dominant culture that affects families and society, and change begins. So this is postmodernism. Change begins by deconstructing the power of cultural narratives and proceeds to co-construct a new meaning of life, which is what I just said in maybe easier terms a second ago. Here are your 4 postmodern approaches. You've heard me mention these: solution-focused therapy, solution-oriented therapy, narrative therapy, and feminist therapy, which we've already learned. I think you will really like solution-focused therapy. I don't always know that it's something that you could do day in, day out, and that's all you did, unless you worked in a certain type of area. Remember, in foundations, when we're talking about college and career settings, that is solution-focused therapy is something that you really could assist you in those kinds of settings. It is a wonderful technique. It can be very easily infused in all that you do, no matter what theory that you lend yourself to. So part of the postmodern approaches is the egalitarian stance of the therapist. We enter the conversation with the client from a stance of just not knowing. We try to get into the client's world as fully as possible and create a movie in your head. And I do this. Although I'm an EMDR therapist, my head is moving like a movie. I even say, you're the expert, let me know what it's like for you. I put that back on them. I want to know I'm just a participant in the story. And I do assist in retelling a story in EMDR. So essentially that's what I'm doing with the bilateral movement. And, you really could put that anywhere in any of these to some degree, but we definitely are. We are definitely deconstructing a narrative and then reconstructing a better story of power, and I am good enough, and it wasn't my fault, and things such as that. So if it helps you to conceptualize it that way, that might be helpful. We are retelling a new story, constructing a new narrative. The not knowing is a key approach for solution-focused and narrative therapy. Now, you do need to know the theorists related to these theories. You will have to know it. And Insoo Kimberg and Steve DeShazer, they were a couple, and they co-founded the Brief Family Therapy Center. They are both sadly no longer with us, but were incredibly hardworking and had some really cool self-care activities. And they took it very seriously, and I so much appreciate that. I think they were pioneers in a lot of ways, but they were definitely pioneers in self-care. So make sure you read about these 2 very interesting people before. Make sure you read the chapter and listening to my fun lectures. This one won't be too long because it's I don't think it'll be too long, but boy, you need to know this one. Okay. So go ahead and read it and learn it. And because you're going to need to know it, and we're going to do it in advanced techniques, you might as well know a little bit about it now. Now, the interesting thing about solution focus is different than EMDR for me as an EMDR therapist. Is they are not interested in how the problem occurred. They're not interested in the past. They're very much focused on the present and the future. The person you see has the answer. Basically, you're looking at them. They're healthy, they're competent, they're not ill, very positive. And I love positive psychology. It's an excellent technique. But you concentrate on what's right, what's working, what's worked in the past. You don't focus on the weakness or the deficits with the client. You focus on what's working. So tell me about a time when things were going well for you. Tell me about a time that you overcame a problem like this in your life. What did you do? And basically really helping that client to know that they have this inherent ability to do these things. I was working with someone this week, and I kind of used this, but in a much deeper way with internal family systems theory. When I had the client recognize their adult protective self, and I go through a series of questions. Think about a time you were protective. Think about a time you were resilient. Think about a time you were courageous. Think about a time you were strong. And all of us really at some point have demonstrated those characteristics. At some point, it's much easier to think about how we've done that for someone else than how we've done it for ourselves. And then I pull all of those into one, to the cohesive vision of an adult protective self. And that could be anything. It could be you like looking your best, feeling your best, or it could be, Wonder Woman or Black Panther or something of that nature. It could be, some kind of power symbol or not. It could be spiritual. And I just kind of let the client go with it. It's kind of cool what comes up. And I'm talking them through this and sometimes tapping. And then I remind them that this is you. So I pulled all of those traits into one singular visual of self so that the client can tap into that resource that they already have. It's positive psychology on steroids, probably, but hopefully that's helpful. And maybe you guys can even do that for yourselves because it's really powerful and helpful to have that visual of your adult protector. We all have one, and that part of our personality comes out a lot, but usually we don't put that on us or remember that we have that skill. Okay. Characteristics of brief therapy. It's brief. It's 3 to 8 sessions. You're moving forward as quickly as possible. You want to quickly establish that alliance. You have very clear goals, and you're really focusing. This is a strengths-based work. What are they competent at? What has worked for them in the past? What are their strengths? You expect that change is possible, and it's going to happen. You have a here and now and future orientation. What are you thinking and feeling and behaving in the moment? There's a specific approach with assessment of goals through brief therapy. And remember, the client is the expert in their life, key characteristics of this. I know, waha, I've switched to a new screen, but I wanted to show you the International Positive Psychology Association here because it parallels positive psych, and there's a lot of good resources for positive psychology, building resilience in the face of the pandemic, the art and science of positive interventions in the workplace, career and professional development series. So there's lots of really interesting resources on this page. There's 200 plus presentations right here. I wonder if we can watch it. Let's just look and see if it'll come up without membership.
Well, without further delay, let's
yeah, okay, great. So yeah, I'm gonna even use this for my chamber talk on Tuesday. It's one of those times where you're thinking, what was I thinking? I knew that was going to happen. But this too shall pass. I will use brief solution focused therapy on myself and remember that I have done these things, also more difficult things than this in the past, and I will do this. So yes, it is a great technique to use on yourself, but there's a lot of different types of resources for positive psychology. So just Google, check out this International Positive Psychology Association. It's going to be great for you to remember that when you get into your practicum and you're looking for things to do with clients. Clients really like these interventions. They're great. And so the process, clients describe their problems and the therapist says, well, how can I be useful to you? How can I help? I love that question. Tell me what your end goal is. How do you see me fitting in? I even ask this throughout the process. Sip of coffee. I'll say, how are things with us? How do you feel like this is going? How do you feel like about this treatment plan? How do you, I just check in. I've learned that a long time ago to do self-eval throughout. Not that they ever really tell you, because I think they're nervous a lot of times. So I try to get real genuine with them, and I try to really follow them with the nonverbal and verbal cues about where we're headed. You work with the client to form goals, and you ask questions like, what will be different in your life when your problems are solved? What made those issues or problems less severe? So you're asking questions like I started asking you earlier. So when is a time in your life you didn't have this problem? When is a time in your life when you had this issue before? What did you do about it? How did you overcome it? So you're looking for solutions. You're solution building conversation. You're giving feedback, you're encouraging, and you suggest what they might do or observe before the next session. And yes, I know, wait a minute, we don't give advice. We don't give advice, but this is a theory, and you're backing up what you're doing. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. And then you evaluate your progress. Remember this theory really believes that the client has the answer. They have everything inherent inside of them. They've got that adult protective self. They've got those strong, resilient parts, and they've got everything they need to overcome this, whatever is happening. Now, one of the downfalls of this, and you're going to see this in the limitations, is complex trauma. Clearly, we know from brain research that, and I've talked about this before, and I love this approach and I use it all the time, even with complex trauma, but it's not the only thing I'm doing, because I know while they do have that strength and resilience, I might have to get to that strength and resilience in a much more intricate, in-depth way, like neurofeedback, EMDR. I may have to do trauma-focused CBT. I have to help them expand their window of tolerance and their coping mechanisms in their brain so they can even get to that. So it is a delicate process, and that's a limitation of this. But I would tell you that this is something, these questions, you could go ahead and memorize them. Solution-focused is such an easy thing to use. And once you become a therapist, these things kind of start rolling off your tongue, even when you don't mean for them to. I often look back at sessions, and when I teach this class, I laugh because I realize I use a lot of things that I sometimes don't remember it came from something. I just think I ask a question or I do a quick technique, and I think that I've heard it somewhere, but I can't say that's Gestalt. And then when I teach this class every year, I remember that I say these questions all the time. I don't call myself a solution-focused therapist, but these are definitely questions that I probably use daily. And I forget I'm actually doing a theory. So doing a theory. I should just stop while I'm ahead right now. Okay. Therapeutic goals and relationship. I need to put this back on. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. You don't want to go back to where we were. That's cool. Hold on. Okay. Nope. That was too far. There's great techniques. Remember, we've already talked about this. The client's an expert. You set attainable SMART goals, just like we've learned. I think that's in feminist and in CBT, and several different theories have the SMART goals. And there are 3 kinds of relationships that can develop between therapists and clients. Number 1 is the customer, where you work together to identify the problem and solution and work toward it. The complainant, a client describes a problem but is not willing to assume a role in finding a solution. The client expects a therapist to change the person who has a problem, which is not possible. They have to do it. We are just the maestro in the orchestra, if you will, of their mind. Visitor, client comes to therapy because of someone else they think has a problem. Yeah, this person may be unable to identify anything to work on. You know why I like EMDR? Because the complainant and the visitor, once we start, I can't help you with other people. I mean, I said that we talked about that pretty much right off the get-go. I can help you with you. And I make jokes about it. I'll say, if I could change your husband, can you imagine? I'd be a billionaire. And, I can only change or help the person work on change that's in my office. But I do remind the clients of for every action, there's a reaction. So I do encourage, because I know that once I work on some goals with my client and they start to see some changes in their life, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Not always favorable, but depends for others in your life. Like when we're unaffected by the way people treat us, or we're not reactive anymore. When we're not reactive, that changes the dynamic in a relationship. But I love the fact that I don't have to deal with this, because once I write their own treatment plan and we start doing EMDR, it does the work for me, right? And I do a float back from whatever the current situation is. So they're coming and complaining about someone else. And it's so funny. I'll say, tell me about how that makes you feel about you. And they look at me funny. It's a different language. We don't think about how we feel when we're talking about someone else. How do they make us feel? I am what? I'm not good enough. I'm worthless. And it's tough sometimes to convince them that I'm not saying that the other person is not doing something wrong. I'm saying that the message that whatever the person is sending to you is an internal message that's encoded in your brain in a maladaptive way. So I love that the complainant and the visitor, I get those, but then they very much become the customer. Ooh, did you like that? That was like, they very much become the customer. Okay, I gotta stop. I'm home with a sick child today. I'm not in my right mind, I don't think. Okay. Although this is probably an entertaining PowerPoint, I would imagine, because I'm just making all sorts of comments. But I keep y'all awake. It's important. Here are the techniques. They're fun. I love these techniques because pre-therapy change is just the pre-therapy change. The research suggests that clients make a change before they even come in, that simply scheduling that appointment will begin to change them. And it's true. It's because they took action, they took some ownership, and the question you ask is, what's changed since you made the phone call, since you to schedule? And it's a great tool, and it's true for all therapy. You can ask, I think, be part of your intake if you wanted it to. Also, I've already talked about this, but there's always the exception. So when did the problem not exist? When was the problem not as intense? How did you overcome the problem in the past, or did you? Helping them to examine the exceptions will help the client to feel like they can move toward a solution. What's a solution? The therapist asks the client, what has to happen for these exceptions to occur more often? What would have to happen? Then the good old miracle question, which I'm sure most of you have already heard about in the past. This is that question. If a miracle happened and the problem you have was solved overnight, how would you know it was solved and what would be different? Clients are encouraged to enact what will be different in spite of perceived problems. If a client asserts that they feel more confident and secure, the therapist might say, let yourself imagine you leave the office today and you're on track to being more confident and secure. What will you be doing differently? Several reasons that this works, but one of them is the visual technique of the future self, which I use all the time in EMDR. I just did that kind of when I was telling you the story about the adult protective self. I sent that part with her into her day, into the future. Scaling questions are just what they sound. Scaling moods, I use it all the time. 0 to 1, 0 to 10. 0 being the best, 10 being the worst. Use it for depression, use it for anxiety, use it for anything to help you get a gauge of what's going on with your client. The formula first session task is homework that a therapist gives clients to complete between the first and second session. Now, whether or not they do it or not, I cannot tell you. At the second session, clients can be asked, between now and the next time we meet, you would like the client to observe. So you can describe to the therapist what happens in your family, life, marriage, relationship that you want to continue to have happen. Then they share in the second session what they observed. It gives hope. Therapist, there's a link here. Let me check it. I'm going to pause so I don't waste your time. Okay, it is working. So that's that. And so please click on it because I know I need to figure out how to share that with you. But if you are, hopefully you can just go watch that on your own. Yeah, so I just talked to y'all for about 5 minutes and I wasn't recording. That was fun. You missed my great question I found that I was so excited about. So another part of what you do, these are the techniques that you use, but you also give feedback to clients. You take a break of 5 to 10 minutes toward the end of each session to compose a summary message for the client. During this break, you formulate feedback that you give to the clients. It may contain strengths you've noticed, signs of hope, and exceptions to the problem, and commentary on what the client is doing that is useful and in the right direction. You give the compliments, then you do a bridge, which links the compliments to task. And then the third is suggesting tasks to the client as homework. Observational task asks client to pay attention to some aspects of their lives and self-monitoring. And the whole goal of solution-focused therapy is termination. Once the clients have a satisfactory solution, then the termination is the goal. One of the questions that I've never asked before in this way that I really liked under terminating on 379 is what needs to be different in your life as a result of coming here to say that meeting with me was worthwhile? What? Mic drop. That was good. That's a good question. So this is short. Goal termination. You can use it with groups. Great little techniques here. Ooh, you can use it with groups. All right, we're moving into narrative, which is Michael White and David Epstein. Narrative therapy is a lot like what it sounds. You listen to the client's narrative, to the client's story. And again, with that postmodern approach, we are helping the client solve problems by telling, retelling, and examining the part of the story. We are analyzing the setting, the characterization, the plot, and themes like they would a novel. I do this in EMDR. This is what I'm doing. I do interweaves and questions, and I restructure and retell the story. So you may go in as your adult self and get your little self out and take your little self out of the trauma. And we may do something even more intricate. At times I have, I've had them yell and say what they want to the abuser, or they bring in their protectors and their lion rips the person apart, or there are hundreds of things, but essentially that's the way I can conceptualize it most easily. So that's the way I like to talk about it, because I think that may make sense to you. But with the EMDR, I'm doing the bilaterals instead of just the retelling of the story. Very powerful. There is a trauma narrative therapy that you can be trained in. And there are, like I said, these two theorists who created it. They are David Epstein and Michael White. They were very interested in the client's worldview. Epstein was alive at the time of your text. Let me see if he's still alive. David Epstein's still alive. He's 76. So, he may be around at conferences when we get to return to those at some point. You may be able to see him. Always neat when you can see anyone who helped to write a theory that we use, isn't it? In this therapy, you externalize the problem. You pull it out and take the story in a new way. And one of the ways that I do this is, like, let's say little Jane. Let's look at little Jane. What is little Jane doing in the story instead of Jane? No. What's teenage Jane doing? How old is little Jane? How old does little Jane look? We're giving the problem a different identity. We're renaming it. We're finding a solution to the problem, and we're normalizing it, thereby empowering the client. The person is not the problem. So sorry, guys. The client's the expert, just like in brief solution focused. You strengths-based, positive psychology, and you consider the client stuck in a narrative. And that is what I'm doing in EMDR. They are stuck in a narrative that's looping, and we're going to retell that story. There is a hot YouTube link here for this. I'm going to check it for you really quick. It looks like it's coming right on up. You should just be able to right click and open that up. And let's make sure it plays. This is narrative therapy. Nice video there for you guys. I do try to include a video for every theory so that you do have an idea how it looks. And then when we get together in class, Lord willing, that we will get back together in class. I'm home with a sick child again. Oh my goodness. When we get back together, we can watch them as well and do some activities and do some case studies and kind of really hammer it home. There is more that I want you to know from this chapter, so just make sure that you look at the case of Stan and the narrative with Gwen. The application, therapeutic technique, and procedure for narrative on 386 and 387 with those externalizing conversations. Make sure you read those and understand the search for unique outcomes, alternative stories, reauthoring, and documenting the evidence. Make sure you know all of the terminology in this chapter.